Welcome to Awaken Life Radio, a podcast about being a spiritual being having a human experience in a world gone mad. Each week, we will discuss how you can heal yourself, cultivate your intuitive superpowers, and be a sacred vessel for planetary healing. I am your host, Narayani Gaia. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Awaken Life Radio. I am here today with the beautiful, talented, and gifted Ann Moller. Hi, Ann.
Hello.
Thank you for being here. This is part 2. The last episode we did, we talked about channeling and Dharma and helping women reclaim and people, not only women, although we both tend to work mostly with women, their power. And we talked about sexuality and all kinds of stuff. And at the end of our last interview, we started looking at timelines and how we can perceive timelines and how we each perceived. I was talking about like the past, and that I have this in my mind, and Zion, everything was perfect harmony. And you were saying that you see the future as being in an ideal world, and I think together we can find the happy medium. And we wanted to hop on today to really start to open the door to connect with the power of our ancestors, of our grandmothers, of both honoring their legacies and I'm going to name this, I don't know if you would put it this way, but reclaiming our gifts through acknowledging where we come from. And this ties into the conversation around timelines and working timelines, because as you know, and many of our listeners know, when we work to heal our childhood issues, or we go into the past and we almost rewrite the past so that we can catch up with the present, so that we can retrieve our souls, reclaim. I just love this word that you're a reclamation coach. So I'm playing with that with you, because we're reclaiming those parts of us maybe that weren't seen, weren't heard, that didn't get to fully feel, that were disembodied and disassociated. And so as we open this conversation around ancestors and connecting with our ancestors and connecting with ourselves, I think it's perfect timing because we're at the eve of October of 2021 right now. And this is the season where we start to slowly get into the darker inner ancestral realms, like pinnacling in the Witches' New Year and Dia de los Muertos on Halloween. And so we have a chance to really connect to both our memories and our love for our ancestors. And you recently lost your beloved grandmother, who seemed like quite a legacy from the little bit that I read about her. What do you feel like your grandmother gifted you? If you'd like to share about that, I'd love to hear kind of what your takeaways, because when we spoken in the last month, you're like, oh my gosh, like so much is culminating and shifting my perspective and the connection and legacy and stuff. So I'd love to invite you to share about your grandmother, what you've been learning, how you've been connecting with her within yourself, and also within your work as a leader for women. What's up for you, girl? What's your big takeaways and your realizations? Because inquiring minds want to know.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for asking. Yeah, it's interesting. It's a different question than people usually ask, "How are you?" or whatever, which I kind of never know how to answer that question. So yeah, okay. Some of the gifts and the takeaways from this passage with my grandmother Well, first off, she was absolutely a force of nature. Everybody who met her, and frankly, I think almost everybody who knows anybody in my family knew that and was inspired by that. And there is sort of a strength that a strength and kind of sense of persistence that I definitely feel like I received as from her as part of our lineage, as well as she saw this film called now I can't remember what it's called, but it's something, I want to say Sundance, but that's not it. It's an old film about skiing. That I just can't remember the name of. But anyway, it's part of the family lore. And she saw it as a teenager, and she grew up in poverty with a single mom in Buffalo. And she somehow, went to the movies and saw this film about skiing, and she completely fell in love with skiing. And she said, I have to do that. So she somehow started to take the train to Ellicottville, New York, which is the town that my mom grew up in, and made friends there. And she would take the train from Buffalo to Ellicottville and go skiing there. And then she met my grandfather, who was 19 years older than her, and was a dentist, and had served in Europe in the war, and they fell in love. And I mean, they were all part of a friend group, and then they fell in love. And they together founded this ski resort in that town. But the reason I bring that story up is because my grandmother raised her kids around what she loved, which was skiing and hiking and being in the woods and being in the mountains. And nature was her church. She had a very complicated relationship with organized religion. So that's another piece of the legacy I got from her, is the capacity to stand up to authority. She was went to school. She was going to a private school, and because her family had no money, she was, working in exchange for going to this school, and she would clean the chapel. It was a Catholic school, I guess. And somebody painted the statue of the Virgin Mary's toenails red. And they accused her of doing it because she was the only one in the chapel after hours. And she didn't do it. And they told her, you have to stand with your arms outstretched. They said, you have to confess. And she wouldn't confess because she didn't do it. And they had her do this whole penance thing that they do. And finally they came to her house and they said, you have to confess to this or you will be excommunicated from the Catholic Church. And she said, at the age of, I think maybe 13.
Wow.
13, she said, if that is what this church is about, I want no part of it. Oof. Her mother totally backed her up.
Chills.
So that's who I come from. That's who I come from.
Right. And when was that? I mean, your grandma was 95. She passed.
Yeah, she was 95 when she passed last month or earlier this month, just like 3 weeks ago. So that was a really long time ago. I mean, I'm really bad with math, but this
right. Let's see. That was the 40. When was she born? She was,
I want to say, late 20s or early 30s, something.
Right.
Like
so that was like the 40s.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's a big part of her legacy. And then this passion thing, she was so clear on what she loved, and she organized her life around doing that. And then she told me multiple times when I was spending time with her last year in person that it was really important to her as a mother to recognize what her children and grandchildren were interested in and support that. So, she drove my Aunt Penny all over the place for her ski competitions. She drove my mom for her harp performances, and my grandparents got my mother a harp when she was 16. But it's also not just like, I'm just going to give this to you. They said, you can have a harp if you learn how to play the piano first, because that's the first. So she did, anyway. So that was the thing about seeing what somebody's into and supporting that. And she didn't really totally, I think there was a lot about my mother that she didn't understand, but she was very proud of her. And there was a lot about me and my lifestyle that she would never live in New York City. Like, it's crazy, right? And she, probably most of the things that I know about acting and movies and TV shows and like, that's not her realm. But she knew that was what lit me up, and she always supported that. And I just think that's so beautiful.
It's graceful. It's graceful.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm listening to you, and I'm reflecting on my grandmother and also my dad, who my dad passed this summer. And similarly, I felt like my grandma passed in January at 103. Also another legacy that everyone in our family knew, Grandma Zelda, the little Jewish grandma from Lower East Side, she represented a whole era, and she a queen, a Leo queen. And I remember I got to, like you, the 2 years before she passed, I got to spend a week with her while my family was traveling in Florida. And I got to tell her that I lost my partner that I was in love with, because they didn't want me to tell her right after it happened, because she had turned 100 and it would have brought her down. And it was like a week before she turned 100, and we had a family party and stuff. Anyway, but I got to share with her about that. And there was this like, it was me and her caretaker in Florida at my aunt's house. And there was this 5-gallon jug of water that needed to be brought into the kitchen, and I carried it from the garage, and it was heavy, and it was a long walk because they have a bigger house, and it was like a whole thing. But I did it, and she was like, "Why would you do that? Like, why wouldn't you ask a man to do that?" And I was like, "There's no man here." And she's like, "Oh, I get it. That's why you never married." And she was basically like, "You're gay, and that's okay." And I was like, "Grandma, I'm not gay. Like, I would tell you. Like, I tried. It's like didn't work. Like, I've talked to like my gay friends about, like I've been like, that would be easier, and like
That's the option.
it's like I wish, it's like, oh gosh, like it's so easy for me to get along with women. But I'm like, I'm not gay, and and like and and then I got to share with her about Sherwin and stuff, and we cried, and there was this whole thing that healed. And I'm going to share this and ask you if you had anything like this happen when you spent time with your grandmother, which was my grandma lost my grandpa when she was like 30, in her 30s, when my dad was 18. And it was, the man of her dreams. And my grandpa Julius, whom I never met in person, in the flesh. And she said, if I could go back out and do it all over again, I put on and she lived in New York. I would go out in my little black dress and heels, and I would date over here and over there, but they couldn't. She's like, I couldn't. We were considered dirty if I was with anyone else. And it hit me so hard, because I was so in love with my partner who passed. Now I'm on the other side, and I'm really excited about dating again. And it took me 4 years to like close that door completely. But I could see how I was so in love when I lost my partner, and he's a legacy. So that, I've shared with you personally about him, and I share on the podcast about him. He pops in. But like that I could just live in that 1 year of paradise that I had, and that it's going to take me really, really making a firm decision, continuing to do the inner work, open up to new possibilities, start my life over, which I'm doing now again, go through great transformation to break that pattern. And I didn't know that was a family pattern
Mm.
because the grandma's been telling stories for the last 40 years about her life and my grandpa and stuff all the time.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you're able to see something besides for the, and I know it's fresh and, we might talk more about this later, but see things that you kind of don't want to do. I mean, your grandma, I mean, gosh, path maker, like way ahead of her time.
Yeah.
But are there any patterns that you feel that you've been able to track back, either with that grandmother or any other of your ancestors, that you've been working through or worked on that I think could inspire our listeners? Because we need inspiration. And also, like, ancestral work comes in bizarre places. Like for years, I'd be like, thank you to my ancestors, and going to like the house I grew up in one time. My brother drove by. I was like, do you want to go by our old house? And I did an offering there to the ancestors of the land because I didn't know about that growing up. And then my grandma and grandpa came into my dreams because they were my ancestors, even though they're not like the native ancestors I thought I was giving thanks to. And then my grandpa helped me through a whole situation. That was the only dream that I ever had of him after that. And so I think, and I'm not going to get into all the dreams and stuff, but I dream. That's one of the medicines that I carry. So will you share about something that you, maybe it'll come later, right? Like maybe you planted the seeds and it's come that you've been able to work through that's
Yeah.
helps
I
you and
mean,
helps you help
well,
others.
on the other side of my family, there's all kinds of stuff. My grandmother on my dad's side was a lovely, sweet woman who went to rehab 17 times, 17 for alcoholism.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's a lot that I could say about that side of the family. If we may or may not do that, but just because Granny, that's my grandmother who passed a few weeks ago, everybody, like literally she has I don't know, 8 great grandkids and like 10 great grandkids, and everybody calls her Granny.
Nice.
So yeah. So anyway, but that one has been a little more fresh on my mind in the past few years. And
Yeah, let's hear some about that if you're open to that.
yeah, partially because I have been looking at legacy in general in my life, and specifically, it's funny that you brought up that example, probably because you're psychic, because specifically around relationships and romance and partnership and sexuality and all those things. So yeah, very similar to what you said, my grandmother, except just a little later. So my grandmother, I think, was 40 something or maybe 50, somewhere in her 40s or maybe early 50s when my grandfather passed, and he passed suddenly. He had an aneurysm on the tennis court and just fell and just
Same thing with my grandpa too. It was sudden. It was a heart attack. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just instant. So and yes, she speaks, and at that time I think my mom was in medical school or something. My parents were together at the time, but it was before I was born. I never met my grandfather. Anyway, so yes, she never was with anybody else. She never said that it was because she thought it was, or because she never said anything about conditioning, that it was wrong or anything. She just said she was never really interested, and other people, her kids at various times and maybe friends, tried to get her to be open to that. And I think she said she was never really interested, and also that, she might have been open if something had presented itself that seemed appealing. But yes, there definitely was a sense of deep grief, and like for decades, and over that loss, and that he absolutely was, the love of her life. And yeah, absolutely. So, and in terms of, I think that my grandmother was not entirely, at times in her life, I don't think she was entirely thrilled to be female. And I'm not sure she was entirely comfortable with like femininity and sexuality, and Like, I think, and she
Mm.
had three, well, actually four daughters, two of whom died and two of whom are still alive. And then she has three granddaughters, all of whom are like pretty darn girly.
Interesting.
And I think that, and there were times over the course of the time that our lives interwove with each other, that I did feel occasionally like she was a little annoyed or judgy or threatened, or just sort of like she didn't quite know what to do with us sometimes when we were like really in our like full on floofy girly thing.
Mhm.
And so there's that. And I also so when I've been reflecting for myself, um, I know that I can definitely put a partner on a pedestal. I can definitely live in the memory of, or live in fantasy, or also it's very easy for, like in some schools of thought around like love addiction, for example, there's a term anorexia, emotional, social, or sexual anorexia.
Mm.
And I sometimes identify in that way. I can sort of swing back and forth, right? So I'm not going to say that my grandmother was like emotionally or sexually anorexic particularly. She had the choices she made for the reasons she made them, but I can see that there's a capacity to sort of just like shut that door that I see in myself sometimes. I see that in myself. And then, and also, she was, her social life was very much centered around her family, and she wasn't, well, she was very centered around her family and activities. I don't know that she was super comfortable in like just a sort of open social situation, which I identify with as well. And I don't think I would speak out of turn to say that my sister and I have discussed, having social anxiety. She's talked about it publicly. Both of my parents, I think, sometimes can be a little nervous in certain social situations. So, I mean, which is a little odd to say, especially for somebody like my mother, who's like so public, but there's a difference between being on stage and being like in a cocktail party, right?
Right. And well, what I'm wondering about, which is interesting, is you're a performer, right?
Yeah.
You're an actress.
Yeah.
So that's like the opposite
Yeah.
of anxiety. Yeah.
It is, except also, again, similar to my mother, that there's a difference between getting on stage and talking to a bunch of people.
Right.
Same with, for me, there's a difference between when you're playing a role, you're still
Right.
yourself, right?
Right.
But you
Right.
have that way to channel it. I actually feel, in some ways, I feel most comfortable on stage
Mm-hmm.
singing,
Mm-hmm.
or yeah, I feel most comfortable singing on stage in
Yeah.
some.
Well, it's
Yeah.
because you feel safe. We feel safe when because we're in control.
Yeah.
So we feel
To
safe
some degree. I
versus,
mean, there's a lot that's not in control about that, but yeah, there is a degree of control for
well,
sure.
if you're in leadership and you're running a show, it's different than being at a big party where you don't know who's going to come up to you, what you're going to say, what's going to happen, what's happening next. I I
Yeah,
think many of our
exactly.
listeners are going
Never.
to identify with that, right? Especially sensitive healers who are like, I feel like those of us that we're all sensitive, really, hopefully. I mean, there's
Yeah.
much, going on, but there's this, I was thinking about this yesterday, like what is that? Like, I'm sensitive, like what that means, and relating to children, because I'm, doing this Pilots Kids course. I'm going to be
Yeah.
teaching children this course, and talking to the parents about their kids' issues and their sensitivity. And I'm like, every child is
Oh,
sensitive.
yes.
So, right. And we all were children. So in a way, it's our childlike self,
Yes.
right? right? And not so many children feel like stable and grounded and strong because we are still sucking the energy of adults to survive. We need them. So we don't naturally come into our sovereignty until ideally, 18. Anyway, I'm going off in that direction because I just wanted to take it a little layer deeper.
Yeah.
Keep going if you have more to share about what you were
Yeah, I mean, uh, another thing that I noticed, well, sort of two sides of the same coin with Granny. One is that was very practical, and she like lived out of her camper for weeks at a time when she would go on trips, and she hiked the Appalachian Trail. So that requires somebody who's like practical and organized, and can really kind of go, like, can be minimalist, right?
Yeah.
And that was something that that was like a really helpful example for me, I feel like. And also on the flip side, I noticed that there were times when she was like almost apologetic about taking up space, like with her stuff or her just, and that's something that I also really identify with. And I just was struck by it in the past few years, because I thought, wow, like, here you are having lived this amazing life and nurtured multiple generations of humans,
Mm-hmm.
and inspired so many people, and there's still that's like must be a very old conditioning that was just never addressed. And it was interesting, and it was just something that I would like to I'd like to release that one, for her. Like, I think that one can be released. There's just no need to be I don't know, it's just there's no need.
It's actually apologetic. I mean, it's like, oh, sorry, don't worry about me. Oh, no, it's okay, don't worry about me. My mother's mom had that as well. My grandma Marie.
Yeah.
She passed 19 years ago this week, and she was a Pisces, and she took care of everyone. I mean, volunteered to the nines. She had breast cancer, and I've come to understand and did some work on this about 10 years ago. I remember we did a ceremony where we did this ancestor ceremony up in the mountains, Santa Cruz at Dharma Ridge, and I'm just having a whole flashback moment. Sorry, that was I forgot about that. It was very powerful, but I've understood breast cancer to be like that you're caring for everyone else before yourself, right? And you leave yourself out. And so as you're talking, I'm thinking of the generational samskaras, like the generational patterns and the karmas that for them was so normal, right? And then like for your mom and my mom, where they're like, I mean, your granny was like a step ahead. My mom was like first wave 70s feminist. Well, I am not just a wife and a mother, right? And I'm here to help our daughters and help the world, to help raise women up, to empower women. And I've just started appreciating that in a new way very recently, actually, with my mom, and really catching how I talk with her and things that she never really said anything about. And I'm like, oh, I wish a man was here to da 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 da. And she just like respects me and kind of like, but the men are like this and women are like this, and I get it. And she's like, whatever, and I'm going to do an interview with my niece, who's whatever wave of feminism we're in, who's just so no bullshit, indigo, magical, like rebellious activist to uplift everyone who hasn't been uplifted. I know you have some nieces and nephews too. And it's like that generation is just like, all right, enough of this. We're all equal. All right already, and just to see like what's been happening, through the generations. And I say this because I want our listeners to get that, it's not always quote unquote your fault if you have a pattern that you're navigating through. It's something that your soul agreed upon by coming back into this time, incarnating so that you can work it out. I love how you say, like, I want to release that for her.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like releasing it for the future as well. And it's releasing it for future generations and ultimately for consciousness.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. For in the field now, there's this pattern. Oh, we get to, I've been navigating through that the last year as well. It's like, I'm in a small house. It's great. I'm by the ocean. I have the big ocean, but my apartment in Santa Cruz was like a freaking closet. And I was like, when I move, I will have space, now I have this like, 1,000+ square foot house. I'm like, it's huge. So yeah, taking up space. I'm dwelling. I want to dwell on that with you. And I'm going to play like, kind of, this is how I coach people. I would imagine you do something similar. And I want to play with that a little with you if I can and ask you some questions about that. Okay. So this is something that I would say in a session. Like, first of all, is that correct? Like, not taking up space, the opposite is taking up space. Am I correct? And
I think so.
Like, let's elaborate on that. Tell me more about, if you're not like apologizing, hiding, not wanting to take up space, like what's possible. Now, your grandma, I read that she was a mayor too, right? Like, so in certain ways,
she didn't know how to take up space. Sometimes she did.
Sometimes she did, sometimes she didn't. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. And also, just briefly to say, I also think that she was of that generation that was like, we are wives and moms, but she also had so much, she was almost, I don't want to say she was ill-suited to that, because she was a wonderful wife and mom, and she, like, that's part of the soul, that was part of her destiny, right? Otherwise we wouldn't be here having this conversation. And at the same time, she had like so much energy in additional directions and places. It's so weird, just like when somebody dies, especially somebody who's been on the planet for such a long time, I find it so surreal that it's like she was here for all this time and now she's not. And like, how do you even encapsulate an entire life? There's something about it that's so big. But I also do love the fact that because a person's presence and effect is so big, they do live on in a certain way. It's really
absolutely. And for people listening, if your grandma was a wife and a mother and she stayed home and she just took care of a family, like, equally as valuable. There's no right, better, worse. Notice if you're listening, if you're comparing, and we want to support you to like to relish in the gifts, but also to be willing to look at those places where generationally it's changed, and also what the opportunities are now for people to shift into and transform into, so that you can support the rapid evolution of the family karmas that affects the whole. So I want to just name that. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And also each of those paths and choices as a mother then affects your kids. I think that especially, well, for all humans, right? Like, you could be at a dinner party, right? And so there are all these different people around the table, and each person has their own personality. And, some people might be really quiet, and then other people might be more verbal, but asking other people questions. And then other people are very verbal, but talking about themselves, or some people are cracking jokes or whatever, all these different personalities. And if one person sits at the table and decides, oh, I don't want to take up too much space because I don't want to take space from somebody else, or I don't want somebody to be threatened, or I don't want people to think bad things about me, or I'm afraid I might say something stupid, or whatever it is, then it's possible that the conversation that is meant to happen at that table doesn't happen because the person is holding back. And on the flip side, I do feel there's something to be said for generosity and awareness of group. I'm like hyper aware of group dynamics.
Yeah, I remember when you gave me a reading, one of them, you won't remember this because that's what happens when we give readings, but you were like, read the room. You're like, you take up because we were talking about that because I take up a lot of space. Yeah. And I was like, oh, read the room. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Like there's almost sort of an energetic dance that can happen between different people in interacting with each other in the same space, right?
Yes.
And my belief, and maybe it's idealistic of me, but my belief is that there is enough space for everybody to shine, maybe not all at the same exact time and not all in exactly the same way. But my vision is when you go to a party or a dinner or a whatever, that there's a back and forth and there's like space for everybody to shine and be themselves and be witnessed and be supported and celebrated and enjoy each other. And I personally feel like holding back and pushing come from the same place. It's comes from trauma. It comes from like either not feeling seen or heard or feeling criticized.
Those are the two two main things. When we do energy healing, it's the same. It's like either this is happening or the other's happening. We want to come into that balance. Yeah,
exactly. So to me, it's like being in balance. And also, it kind of reminds me of, so the specific thing that triggered this for me with my granny. So we were rooming together at this family. We had this big family reunion in the Adirondacks 2 years ago. And it was literally like 2 years ago this month. Anyway, so, and she and I were rooming together because, I'm single and she's granny and she's single. And so we're in the same room. And that meant we were sharing a bathroom. We had 2 beds and 1 bathroom. And she did not leave her toiletries on the counter in the bathroom. She kept carrying them back and forth from her area of the bedroom. And I said, Granny, you can leave those here. And she said, oh, no, I just don't want to be in your way. And honestly, I felt so sad to hear her say that, because I'm like, you're the matriarch here. You're 93 years old. There's plenty of space. And if anybody should be accommodating anybody, it should be the way around, and also there's plenty of space. So, that was what kind of triggered that for me, was that image of her like kind of walking around with her toiletries instead of leaving them there. And I guess my vision is that people, and I do feel, of course, as you said, we're both women, we work mostly with women. I don't know how men do this, but I know the space of women interacting, and I know that there's a lot that is not said between women often. And to me, it's like, that's not that big. It's not that big of a deal, but I also feel there are so many opportunities between women to just be like real and trust that we can both coexist in the same space and that there's enough. So, in that situation, it's a grandmother and her granddaughter. There's only so much that needs to be done there. Like, I just was more sort of observing. I didn't need to like change her, but there's a way in which maybe 2 people in a space could say, I don't know if it was because she knows that I'm a little more glam, so she thought I needed more space. I have no idea. But the point is to have a conversation and to trust that there's enough literal space and energetic space.
Right. Yeah. Well, what's coming to mind is like the nice girl.
Exactly.
I'm in the South now. People
Yeah.
are nice and they'll be like, yes, ma'am. And they kind of are like,
Yeah.
they might in a second when you're not looking be like, fuck you.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, so interesting that you say that, because I also think that my granny was actually pretty opinionated.
uh-huh.
And, but she was, yeah, she grew up in a generation where you're supposed to be nice. And I feel like that's something that I'm also,
Mm-hmm.
working through, is like, I'm actually not as nice as I act. And like, red hair has given me so much
Yes.
bigger boost of freedom to just be like, okay, this is what I actually think. It's not that I'm not kind.
No, I get it. I get it. I mean, not until I have my podcast did I even like curse online. I mean, I'm like, I am here to love you and hold you, and I present myself, but my friends know that I'm a no bullshit, down to earth, very opinionated, often very judgmental. I check myself and I return to compassion as much as possible. But that, especially as I get older and I feel so deeply held and supported after many many years of cultivating, I don't even know, healing of, what I've been through is like, I just feel like there's no way that I can disconnect from God. I mean, I feel all God goddess. I feel unloved even when I forget, and somehow I don't
Mm,
know, maybe it's part of going through 4 years of deep grief.
mm,
But I get that. And also there's reasons, it's protection too. There's good reasons. There's reasons why we stay stuck in certain patterns, that until we can get to that reason, can we find a new way to behold the sanctity of that need, right? So like, oh, well, she wanted to respect you. Well,
yeah.
she can respect you and take up space,
Yeah.
right? Right. And we can have conversations that our grandmothers didn't have the languaging for, because men were very assumptuous and entitled.
Okay. So you just said something about the connection to God and grief. It speaks to another deep piece for me about Granny. And that is, one, she was very spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
And she actually found like audio cassettes of Abraham Hicks. Like, she discovered them for our family. That's how we came
Mm-hmm.
to listen to them. And she was part of the National Association of or the Dowsing Society of America forever. I mean, I think she mostly did that for hiking for the water, but I think she knew how to use it for multiple things. I
Mm-hmm.
am going to be inheriting her dowsing pendulum, which I feel super
Mm-hmm.
honored about.
Mm-hmm.
And she just was a very spiritual person. And one of the things, and I do think, to the point you just made, that was partially of necessity, because she lost her mother, one of her daughters, and her husband, all in the space of approximately 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so she did say to me that at that time, she had a choice of shutting down or opening a new door to a new life. And that was what she chose. And I also know that that was partially, that took that took a village. It took the support of her kids, like, and all of
Mm-hmm.
that. But she did make that choice. And again, she was very spiritual. She and I used to, especially in like recent years, where she was definitely she lost her best friend a handful of years ago. They were hiking buddies and stuff. And then between that and sort of finally losing some of her mobility, which was like part of her identity, there were new kinds of forms of grief and frustration and stuff. So we would meditate together on the porch of her cabin. And she was so open to being in that space, and so like almost hungry for being in that space of connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that one thing that I noticed, I don't know that she had quite developed the capacity to create that for herself, like on tap. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's something that, was sad to witness, and also something that I also relate to. Like, it's so easy to get disconnected and to sort of lose your faith and to need to rely on outside sources. And at the same time, there are ways to stay connected
Mm-hmm.
and realign in a very short period of time. And I think
Right.
that maybe because so much of her life was in the realm of the physical,
Mm-hmm.
um,
She
I
was
think
she was a doer.
she
She
was a
was a
doer.
doer.
Yeah, she was a
Yeah.
doer. And that was part of how she connected to spirit. And so um, I feel, for me, I don't know, that's part of the legacy that I'm also sort of updating for myself, is
Mm.
maybe integrating those a little differently, or
Yeah.
in knowing it's okay to have grief and melancholy. And also there's the access point. I don't know, there's something about the access point to joy and connection that I feel I have also struggled with, and I would like to, but I've also made a lot of progress, and I would like to sort of again reclaim that for myself
Yes.
and for her,
Yes.
and for my nieces, and hopefully I'll have children and all of that. But
Yes.
it's, there's like something about that, because for me it's almost, I don't know if this is your experience, but sometimes that connection, it's like, it's like turning just a couple of, it's not even a full turn. It's like you just turn like, and I realize
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying something
Mm-hmm.
that I need to explain. The
It's a
visuals.
shift. It's a shift in perception. It's a shift.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Carlos Castaneda called it the assemblage point. It's like you shift
Mhm.
how you are, and then your energy lines up.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah. But
Mm-hmm.
it can be subtle. It's like, I
Yeah.
guess my experience is that not always, sometimes it's not subtle, but there are times when the shift in perception is available. A big shift in perception is available from a pretty seemingly small step.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. I think what we're talking about is subtlety. I mean, when you say that your granny, rather didn't take up space in the bathroom, and it's just such a small aspect, knowing that all of us have all these little things that we
Oh,
can
sure.
always work on. It's one of those things that when we clean up in a subtle way that we can, and when we clean up in a subtle way, it can affect all aspects of our lives, that maybe we could see when we look back, especially if, like Abraham says, 17 seconds. I think now it's down to 16 or 15 seconds. I heard
Oh, really?
recently. Yeah, it's like it got less, um, but when we like concentrate on it and put attention on it, like self-care and like sitting in the silence, um, it does source us
Mm.
to gain the communion. So we're talking about space, and one of the things I learned from Jamie Sams, which I loved, which is a great, great female native teacher. She wrote The 13 Original Clan Mothers, Dancing Your Dream, which talks about the stages of initiation, and our 113-year-old teachers, and the Wolf Clan and the Seneca teachings and the grandmother teachings, and the prophecies, including how it relates to the crystal skulls and like where that ties in, and that they're all like these archetypes of woman. And when we heal all these archetypes within ourselves, we can become our vision. I mean, it just gave me all of that in my 20s.
Wow.
And yeah, and so there's this one piece about, circle, and like how your first circle is, you and sacred source, right? When you're a child, the first, like my guru would say, like your first guru is your mom, because like you come out and you're like, mom, boobs. So
Yeah.
it's like, oh, mom. But as you grow up and mature, ideally we have that connections with spirit, then our connections with our partner, our
Mhm.
beloved, and our family, immediate circle, right? And then your outer circle, like the community, and then the greater world. And that when we're in right relationship with source first, then we can have high functioning, healthy relationships when we go out. But, and I saw this in California a lot, especially with a lot of lonely people.
Mm.
I mean, myself at some point, where there, and you might see this because you're in a juicy community as well, where people, they may be very lonely and not have intimate personal relationships, but then they're like out in community looking for those connections, but it feels off because the person isn't really grounded in themselves. And there's a
Yeah.
projection of that. Whereas I don't think your grandmother or my grandmother had that, because they did have love and
Yes.
intimate connection and intimate family.
Yeah.
Um, but that circle is really important, which brings it back to kind of our work and what we're doing now, and that how we both train women in that, in like sitting and like listening and talking to God, goddess, and like getting your clarity. And like right now, some of my mentees are in this training where we work with gratitude, not foundationally, because it can be a bypass. Gratitude can be like just be grateful, and it's like, well, I'm just fucking pissed, like, but
Yeah.
that like gratitude is relationship.
Yeah.
And that and this is also going to like be in the book. So gratitude is like you're always grateful for something, and
Yes.
it's right relationship. Like if I'm grateful, like I'm grateful for you for this meeting today, like it's natural, I feel that's true, I am.
Yeah.
I'm not grateful when I get cut off by somebody's driving. I'll be like, what the hell, my nervous system, right? But the way that we return to that is by that I practice is like you sit with it. Maybe you talk about it with a friend or a therapist or something, but you really sit with it and you get your energy to a place of clarity. So you know what you want to say, you know what your needs are, right? You know what maybe you do this, like, you know what you're asking for, you know what your need is. So by the time you have that conversation with somebody that you're not necessarily in right relationship with, you can be really clear and grounded in yourself and don't inhibit them to be defensive, reactive. That creates that spiral into some kind of a fight or something. So I feel like as I reflect on our grandmothers, and gosh, I really don't want to wrap this up. I mean, what are we doing, girl?
Well, apparently I can just talk about Granny for like 2 hours.
No, last podcast too. I'm like, we just get warm after an hour. We need to do some retreat or workshop together or something at some point. I hope at some point in our lives. So there's like this way of women finding our voices that we didn't, that maybe our grandmothers, we're talking about grandmothers at this point, didn't always have, because of their fear of being controlled, dominated, because of the aggression, the masculine aggression, and that like finding how to express ourselves with love and clarity and, in a parasympathetic response can help support healing, right? So how do you work with women to express their needs? And I'm just going to bring us forward a little bit. I know you want to keep talking, unless you want to say more about Granny right now, but
okay, I will say one small thing and then I will, which is another thing I noticed in the family dynamic is that there was a mythology of this woman that was true. It was true. It wasn't myth as in like lies, but mythology as in the things that were emphasized and talked about and celebrated, both within the family and in the public. And most of those things had to do with her more, I would say, masculine energy accomplishments and activities. And in the time that I spent with her last year, which I spent a month in my mother's hometown, seeing my grandmother almost every single day, which was incredible. And during that time, most of what she shared with me was more of the softer, more vulnerable, more feminine aspects of her experience of life.
Wow.
And I just found that so beautiful. And I guess I'm not really sure what I want to say about that, except that for me, it was just a reminder that people are whole, we are whole human beings,
Right, right,
and
right, right.
um
Right. That came from the intimacy.
yes,
That is what happens in intimacy. That is what happens when we let people in and when we spend close time with people. We do open up.
yeah,
We
yeah.
do
And it
open
was
up.
a beautiful opportunity to, I mean, I kind of, in some ways, I kind of not coached, but I just created space for her
Mhm.
in our experiences together over the past few years. And I feel that was really such a privilege and an honor,
Right.
you know?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Well, and
So,
also you don't have children.
yep.
It was 2020, so the
Yeah.
world, we had a
I was
second to
working
breathe.
remotely, and I had to get out.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was just a beautiful, for me, it was a reflection of like just the range and fullness of a life and of a woman,
Mm.
you know. Yeah. So,
I remember my grandma, Marie, who passed 19 years ago,
mm,
spending time with her. And I want to watch this. My brother did like a video of
mm,
interview with my grandparents like a few
yeah.
years before she passed.
Mm,
And I started dancing. I was doing like Afro-Cuban dance and Brazilian and Haitian
mm.
in New York. Um, and I was telling my grandma, and she was so happy, that I was
Ah,
dancing, and she was like, keep dancing, like
oh,
always dance,
so
and
good.
now I could feel how much, as I get older, how much she influenced, my love for dance and my love for nature. She used to paint birds and like they just
Mm,
love nature and like things like that. And we reflect on that. But
yeah.
I find also with my mom, my little mommy, I talk about her all the time on my podcast. Trying to get her on, trying to get my mom on one.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, I want my mom and my niece together. I think that'll be pretty profound. Um,
Mm,
but I was talking with her when I talk with my mom, like I'm in a rush and like things come up, like we just can't connect about them. But when I realize the more time I spend, the deeper we go. Just like our call right now,
yeah.
just like this. It's like the more time, the warmer we are. It's like salsa dancing. Your first dance, you're like,
Oh,
these
totally.
shoes,
Or
like,
tango dancing, which is what I do.
oh, I want to do tango. So sexy.
Oh, you would love it. You would
Oh,
love it.
girl.
So good. It's so good. And it's so spiritual. It's like
Mm.
literally like you are in a mutual meditation with your partner.
It's hard though. I mean, talking about the
Yes, it
feminine
is.
soft energy, even salsa, like we did something called sensual bachata last weekend.
Mm,
Like
I've
bachata.
seen that. It is so
It's
cool.
so hot. It's so hot. And we had this
Yeah.
like professional couple from New York that are these like French and Spanish. They're like this international performers
Yeah.
and like they're perfect. And I did a workshop and I'm like the guys are learning and I'm like trying to follow and she comes up to me, she's like, you got to relax your wrist because I trained
Mm.
like in massage and in martial arts, like the wrist is always like straight and firm
Oh,
and
yeah.
she's like, you gotta like I'm like, oh, is that it? And like there's all these ways, like you soften your arm, but like you keep your feet
Mhm.
going, but you anchor in your core, but then you like let yourself and it was so tricky. It's so tricky. And I have really good rhythm and I study African dance for 20 years. So I
Oh,
mean,
amazing.
but it's individual dance, not partner
Yeah.
dancing. And I could just feel like my grandma, and how they did all this community dance for so
Mm.
long and how it brought them together. And oh, it's so good. And then the metaphor of dance is like live right now, like dance, live, show up. This is our lives. We've all been faced with the reality that we're going to go and anyone could go. And some people think there's absolutely no rhyme or reason, but there is. There's health, there's also soul choice. Um, and in this time, I mean, I just want to ask like our listeners to contemplate, you know, to look at what's holding them back because for many women it is their voice. And I hear that. And do you hear that a lot? That it's like finding your voice and speaking your truth
Yeah.
and often it's people who are in relationship, who are like always in relationship Maybe because I've been single for so long. Like, I'll say anything to anyone. I don't care, whatever. Or my Jewish grandmothers, just like influence. It's like, it's got something to say. For me, it's to listen more,
Mhm.
to stay curious and to not be the knowing, I know, and I will tell you
Mhm.
everything I'm thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we get to look at that. How do you work with women to find their voice, and express themselves and their needs and take up space?
Yeah. Um, Many ways. Certainly, there's almost always some kind of inner child stuff for us to work through and heal. There is, I mean, I almost always, not in every session, but in many sessions, we do an intuitive sort of download at the beginning and see what
Mhm.
wants to come through. And so those are often include some kind of images, that might be, that are symbolic, but can be guiding for them. And then also there's often a guide or two, in like some sort of goddess or a person, a spirit guide, somebody who's passed on, who wants to come in with a message or whatever. So those are people, those are guides that they can be in conversation with, ongoingly. Or sometimes they might symbolize the quality that this woman, that the client is kind of being invited to expand into. So she can, like, it's almost like asking, your guardian angel to be with you when you have a difficult conversation or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So,
So first communicating with their spirit
yeah,
guides.
yeah. And then there's also sometimes dancing honestly is actually part of, that's more in the group work, but generally there's dancing because
Mm.
it helps women remember who they are.
Mm.
That just came out of my mouth, but I should give credit to my friend Rochelle Sheik, who created Koya, and the slogan of Koya, which is Qoya, and it's a movement form, and
Mm.
primarily for women, but any gender can do it. But the slogan is, when we move, we remember.
Mm.
So powerful.
Mhm.
So, and then, journaling, there is, we do a lot of, I mean, honestly, so much of the time the dynamics have to do with women recognizing how important their own radiance and light is, and how much
Mm.
power they have,
Mhm.
and just like getting into agreement with that.
Mhm.
And letting go of, again, apologizing for it, or waiting for somebody else to go first, or letting go of these patterns of, I'm only okay if he's okay, or
That was my
those
grandma.
things.
Mhm.
Yeah, the codependency is a big one that we
Right.
work through all the time.
Clearing the codependency and
Yeah.
claiming
And
your sovereign voice.
and then there are like energetic visualizations and tools that I often pass on to help with the boundaries. And
Mhm.
and also doing things in there, like sometimes it's conversations to have.
Yeah.
So sometimes we talk about the specifics of, what to say and how to say it, but often it's more like the word you use, sovereignty, like taking sovereignty over their own energetic space,
Yes.
and trusting that, and it letting the other people and moving parts ripple around it, and really recognizing, like, one of the phrases that I often say to clients is, remember, you're the source. Like, there's that famous painting, I think it's by Courbet, and it's l'origine du monde.
Mm.
And it's a painting of literally a woman's just spread naked, you know, like from here down, right? From the
Mhm.
waist
Mhm.
down. It means the origin of the world.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean that men and masculinity don't have power or creation. They do.
Mhm.
But as a woman, you have a particular innate
Mm-hmm.
connection to this sense of light
Mm-hmm.
and life force. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that so much of it is about taking responsibility for that and ownership of that and celebrating it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It really is. And it reminds me of many things, but specifically just to kind of wrap it up. Um, it's like ties into that Jamie Sam's teachings and the prophecies of as women fully reclaim ourselves, and the men will learn through us how
Yeah.
we respect ourselves.
Yes.
They will respect us, right?
Yes.
So fighting them to respect us doesn't seem to be the most effective way. If you ask any man that I know, including the ones in my family, it's honoring ourselves and enough to communicate our needs and sharing what we want and what's our truth that actually cultivates respect, which is whereas for men, it could be a little different how men get respect. And I hope that if you're gender fluid, or if you identify as male or female or trans or anywhere in between, that in some way that this messaging helps you tie in with your own grandmother line. Be patient with us of our generation as we learn how to weave the things that we've learned into languaging that supports everyone.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that, because it's important to me in general as a human on the planet. I also happen to have a sibling who is non-binary, and so it's something that's like
Mm-hmm.
it comes up in my mind on a regular basis. And what I always say is,
Mm-hmm.
first off, I don't purport to be a authority on what the experience is of being non-binary or trans. I'm an authority on the experience of being a woman because that's my experience.
Yeah.
And I also have observed and heard from many people of all genders and gender expressions that the masculine and feminine energy lives in each of us.
That's
And
right.
to be perfectly honest, part of my journey is anchoring more into my masculine energy,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we need both.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
and we all have both.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Assuming we come from a sperm and an egg, even if it's in
Yes.
a petri dish or whatever.
Yes.
So, okay. Any final words that you'd like to share today? I think we brought it back home, hopefully, for our
Yes.
people.
Thank you for being patient with me. It's like every time you say, I think that I think part of what's
Mhm.
happening is you're tapping into something. So every time you say something, it sparks like.
I know. My third,
We're sort of on a different wave. We're on this particular wavelength.
I know my third eye buzzes too. And we both track on lots of different levels.
Yeah.
So that's why I do private coaching. A lot of private coaching, I develop very intimate relationships with people
Yeah.
because there's so much to cover in
Yes.
order to see things all the way through.
Yeah.
And it takes time to see things all the way through, even getting to the root of the issues. We can say, oh, our grandmother was like this, but even just talking about it doesn't actually get all the way through it. It is the work that you do, and the work of doing inner work and working with the energetic patterning and like shifting your perspective in all the ways that we're being, that when we shift them, that helps us to actually ground those new ways and hopefully rapidly evolve our ancestral lines for the future. We didn't even talk about the future.
I know.
Okay, maybe we could do in the spring. Maybe we could do another one. I'd love to interview again. I just have so much fun.
I think the last thing I'll say is there's an album called Graceful Passages that was very helpful to my grandmother in her final months and years, and I have found it super helpful as well over the years, and for soothing, for solace, for meditation. So I will say that as something to pass along.
Graceful Passages. Is there a link to that? Something that we can look up?
Oh, I'll probably on Spotify. Yeah, it's on Spotify.
Okay, we'll find it and we'll post it in the show notes.
Yeah, there's both an instrumental version and a version with narration.
Oh, I'm so curious. Thank you. And how can our listeners follow up with you?
I have my Instagram is at Ann C. Moller. So ANNC as in cat, MOLLER. And that's where I am. That's where the most up-to-date stuff is. I also do have a website, which is annmollerthemuse.com. And you can reach me through either of those.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. If you enjoyed listening to today's episode, and I sure hope you did, you can listen to Awaken Life Radio wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. To join the conversation, hop on over to our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Awakened Life Tribe. You can join us there and share any thoughts, feelings, insights, or questions that you have from listening to Awaken Life Radio, and we can interact and connect more